The golden light of Constantinople, a Byzantine sleep story. Settle back, close your eyes, and let me take you on a gentle journey through time to the year 537 AD, to the greatest city in the world, Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. The dawn of wonder in the soft morning light of December 27th, 537 AD. The great city of Constantinople awakened slowly, like a beautiful dreamer, reluctant to leave her slumber. The golden dome of Hagia Sophia rises majestically against the pearl-gray sky, its surface catching the first rays of sunlight and scattering them like precious gems across the 7 hills of the city. The Bosphorus flows peacefully below, its waters a mirror reflecting the gradually lightening heavens. Small fishing boats drift silently across its surface, their occupants moving with the unhurried grace of those who know that the rhythm of the sea cannot be rushed. The gentle lapping of waves against the harbor walls creates a soothing melody that has echoed through these waters for centuries. Emperor Justinian stands at a window in the great palace, his silhouette framed against the growing light. At 55 years of age, he carries himself with the quiet dignity of a man who has seen empires rise and fall, who has known both triumph and loss. His dark eyes, flecked with gold in the morning sun, gaze across his beloved city with a mixture of pride and contemplation. The emperor's thoughts drift to the great cathedral that dominates the skyline. Just weeks ago, Hagia Sophia was completed, not merely built, but born from the dreams of architects, the sweat of workers, and the prayers of believers. The structure represents more than stone and mortar. It embodies the very soul of an empire that bridges 2 worlds, East and West, connecting the wisdom of ancient Greece with the power of Rome and the mysticism of the Orient, Theodora. His empress joins him at the window. Her presence brings a sense of calm completeness to the moment. Once an actress from humble beginnings, she now stands as one of the most powerful women in the world. Her intelligence and strength having shaped the very course of the empire. Her hand finds his, and together they watch as their city slowly comes to life below in the streets. Constantinople begins its daily awakening. The great city stretches out before them like a living tapestry, woven from the threads of countless lives, cultures, and dreams. The morning air carries the mingled scents of fresh bread from neighborhood bakeries, incense from the many churches, and the salt tang of the sea dot in the workshops of the artisan quarter. Craftsmen are already at their benches, their skilled hands shaping silver, carving ivory, and weaving silk. These are the hands that create beauty, not for glory or fame, but because beauty itself is a form of prayer, a way of honoring the divine through human skill and patience. The silk merchants in the covered markets are arranging their precious wares, fabrics that have traveled the Silk Road from distant China, dyed in colors that seem to hold captured sunlight. Purple silk, the color reserved for emperors, hangs alongside deep blues that mirror the evening sky and gold thread that sparkles like stars. The architect's dream. Let us drift back in time. 25 years earlier, when the great cathedral was nothing more than a vision in the minds of two brilliant architects, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. These were men who understood that architecture was not merely about creating shelter, but about reaching toward heaven itself. A mathematician and physicist possessed a mind that could see the invisible forces that hold buildings aloft. He understood that a dome is not simply a curved roof, but a prayer made manifest in stone, a circle that represents the eternal, the infinite, the divine. His calculations were like music, each equation a note in a greater symphony of structural harmony. Isidore, the elder of the two, brought to their partnership the wisdom of ancient Greek geometry and the practical knowledge of Roman engineering. He had studied the Pantheon in Rome, that miraculous structure where light itself becomes a building material, streaming through the oculus to create an ever-changing interplay of shadow and illumination. Together, they would create something unprecedented, a dome that would seem to float weightlessly above the vast interior space, supported not by solid walls, but by a revolutionary system of half-domes and arches that distributed the enormous weight, like the branches of a great tree sharing the burden of its leaves. The planning of Hagia Sophia took place in quiet chambers, lit by oil lamps, where parchment scrolls covered with geometric diagrams covered every surface. The two architects worked through the night, their calculations punctuated by long periods of contemplative silence. They were not merely designing a building. They were creating a physical representation of the cosmic order, a place where the earthly and the divine could meet. The mathematical principles they employed, ancient world, the golden ratio, the perfect circle, the triangle that represents the trinity of divine nature, every measurement, every angle, every curve was calculated not just for structural integrity, but for its spiritual significance. As dawn approached after those long nights of planning, the architects would sometimes climb to the roof of the palace to watch the sunrise over the Bosphorus. In those moments of quiet observation, they could envision their great dome silhouetted against the morning sky, a new star in the constellation of Constantinople's skyline. The Emperor Justinian himself, A man of deep learning and spiritual devotion understood the magnitude of what they were proposing. He had commissioned them not simply to build a church, but to create a monument that would proclaim to the world the glory and permanence of the Byzantine Empire, a structure that would stand as a bridge between the human and the divine. The gathering of craftsmen as the plans for Hagia, Sophia, took final shape. Word spread throughout the empire and beyond that the greatest construction project in centuries was about to begin. From every corner of the Byzantine world, master craftsmen began to gather in Constantinople, drawn by the promise of participating in something truly extraordinary. From the marble quarries of Proconnesus in the Sea of Marmara came the stonecutters, men whose families had worked stone for generations. Their weathered hands could read the grain of marble like a sailor reads the wind, knowing instinctively where to place the chisel to reveal the beauty hidden within the raw stone. These craftsmen brought with them not just skill, but a deep reverence for their material, understanding that each piece of marble was a gift from the earth itself. The mosaists arrived from Ravenna and Thessalonica, carrying with them tiny cubes of colored glass and stone called tesserae. These artists were the painters of the Byzantine world, but their canvas was not cloth or wood. It was the very walls and domes of churches. They worked with infinite patience, placing each tiny tessera with the precision of a jeweler, creating images that would shimmer and glow in the candlelight for centuries to come. From the forests of Anatolia came the master carpenters, bringing with them timber that had been carefully selected and seasoned. These men understood wood as a living material, knowing how different trees grew and aged, how cedar resisted decay while oak provided strength. They would create the massive wooden frameworks needed to support the dome during construction, temporary structures that were themselves marvels of engineering. The metalworkers arrived from Damascus and Antioch, masters of bronze and silver, who could create everything from massive doors to delicate religious vessels. Their forges glowed day and night as they shaped the metal fittings that would hold the great structure together, and the beautiful ornaments that would adorn its interior. But it was not only skilled craftsmen who came to Constantinople. Thousands of laborers made the journey, as well men seeking honest work and the chance to be part of something greater than themselves. They came from villages throughout the empire, leaving behind their familiar fields and workshops to participate in what they sensed was a moment of historical significance. The city prepared to house and feed this influx of workers. New dormitories were constructed, temporary workshops were established, and the great supply chains that would keep the project moving were put into place. Ships arrived daily at the harbor, carrying marble from Greece, timber from the Black Sea region, and precious materials from the far reaches of the empire. The sacred foundation. On a crisp morning in February 532 AD, the groundbreaking ceremony for Hagia Sophia took place with all the solemnity befitting such a momentous occasion. The site chosen was not arbitrary. It stood upon the ruins of earlier churches, including the original Hagia Sophia that had been destroyed during the Nika riots just weeks before. Emperor Justinian, clothed in purple robes embroidered with golden eagles, performed the first ritual breaking of earth. The ceremony was attended by the Patriarch of Constantinople, senators, architects, and representatives of the various guilds whose members would build the cathedral. Incense rose in fragrant clouds as prayers were offered in Greek, Latin, and the ancient tongues of the Eastern churches. The foundation stones were laid with careful attention to both engineering requirements and spiritual significance. Each cornerstone was blessed individually, and small relics of saints were placed within the mortar. This was not merely construction, it was the creation of a sacred space, a place where the physical and spiritual worlds would intersect. The site itself held deep historical resonance. Here, Constantine the Great had envisioned his new Rome, the city that would unite the Roman Empire under the banner of Christianity. Here, generations of emperors had worshipped and been crowned. The very earth seemed sanctified by centuries of prayer and devotion. As the foundation walls began to rise from the ground, a sense of anticipation permeated the city. Citizens would gather at safe distances to watch the progress, bringing their children to witness history in the making. Elderly residents who remembered the construction of other great buildings in their youth marveled at the scope and ambition of this new project. The work proceeded with careful deliberation. Each stone was fitted precisely, each joint sealed, with mortar that had been mixed according to ancient formulas passed down through generations of builders. The foundations grew deeper and stronger, creating a base that would support not only the physical weight of the structure above, but the spiritual aspirations of an entire civilization. During the foundation work, an extraordinary discovery was made. Buried beneath the site, workers uncovered remnants of much older structures, Byzantine, Roman, and even Greek foundations that testified to the ancient sacredness of this location. These archaeological treasures were carefully preserved and incorporated into the new building where possible, creating a physical link between the present project and the deep historical roots of the city, the rising walls. As spring arrived in Constantinople, the walls of Hagia Sophia began their majestic ascent toward the sky. The construction site became a small city in itself, bustling with activity from dawn to dusk. The sound of chisels on stone created a rhythmic percussion that echoed off the surrounding buildings, while the creaking of pulleys and the calls of workers added their voices to this symphony of creation. The master masons worked with the patience of sculptors, each stone carefully shaped and fitted. No two stones were exactly alike, yet each found its perfect place in the growing structure. The walls rose in courses, each level perfectly horizontal and true, creating a foundation of strength and beauty that would endure for millennia. The marble arrived by ship from quarries throughout the empire. Each variety told its own story. The pure white marble of Penteli, the same stone used in the Parthenon. The rich red marble of Egypt. The deep green marble of Thessaly. And the precious purple marble reserved for the most important architectural elements. These stones were like jewels in a great crown, each contributing its unique beauty to the overall magnificence of the cathedral. The Byzantine architects had learned from their Roman predecessors the secret of creating mortar that would last for centuries. Their mixture included not only lime and sand, but also ground marble, dust, and even powdered pottery, creating a binding agent that was almost as strong as stone itself. This mortar would hold the massive structure together through earthquakes, wars, and the simple passage of time. As the walls grew higher, intricate systems of scaffolding were erected. These temporary wooden structures were marvels of engineering in their own right, capable of supporting not only the weight of workers and materials, but also the massive lifting devices needed to place stones at increasing heights. The scaffolding created geometric patterns against the sky, like the skeleton of some enormous wooden creature. The work was dangerous as well as demanding. Men labored at heights that would make modern construction workers nervous, with only ropes and their own skill to keep them safe. Yet accidents were remarkably rare, perhaps because every worker understood the sacred nature of their task and approached it with corresponding reverence and care at night. When the construction site fell quiet, watchmen patrolled the growing structure to protect it from vandalism or theft. By lamplight, the rising walls took on an almost mystical quality, their shadows creating an ever-changing pattern that seemed to dance with life of its own. The Master Dome, a marvel, takes shape by the autumn of 535 AD. The moment had arrived for the most challenging and magnificent aspect of the construction, the great central dome. This would be no ordinary dome. It would be the largest ever attempted, spanning nearly 32 meters across and rising to a height that would make it visible from ships far out at sea. The engineering challenges were unprecedented. The dome would rest not on solid circular walls, as in the Pantheon, but on a revolutionary system of 4 enormous arches called pendentives. These curved triangular sections would transfer the weight of the circular dome to the square foundation below. Like cupped hands supporting a precious sphere, Anthemis and Isidore supervised every aspect of the dome's construction. Personally, they had spent months calculating the precise curves, the optimal thickness, and the distribution of weight. Their mathematical models were works of art in themselves, geometric diagrams that revealed the hidden harmony underlying the structure. The construction of the dome required the creation of an enormous wooden framework, a temporary structure that would support the masonry while the mortar cured. This framework was itself a masterpiece of carpentry, built from specially selected timber and assembled with joints so precise they required no nails. The wooden ribs of the framework created patterns that were both functional and beautiful, like the inside of some vast wooden flower. The dome was built in a spiral. Each ring of stones supported by the framework until the mortar had time to set and gain strength. The workers moved with the careful choreography of dancers, each man knowing his precise role in the complex operation. Stone by stone, the dome grew upward and inward, approaching the moment when the final keystone would lock the entire structure into place. The materials for the dome were specially chosen for their lightness. Instead of solid stone, the builders used hollow clay pots and specially manufactured lightweight bricks. These materials reduced the dome's weight without sacrificing strength, an innovation that would influence church architecture for centuries to come. As the dome neared completion, anticipation throughout the city reached fever pitch. Citizens gathered in the streets surrounding the construction site, craning their necks to glimpse the progress. Betting pools formed about whether the ambitious structure would hold. Though most Constantinopolitans had complete faith in their emperor and his architects, the placement of the final stones was attended by Emperor Justinian himself, along with the highest officials of church and state. As the last piece of the framework was removed and the dome stood free for the first time, a collective gasp rose from the assembled crowd. The dome seemed to float weightlessly above the vast interior space, a miracle of engineering that appeared to defy the very laws of nature. The interior transformed with the dome complete. Attention turned to the interior of Hagia, Sophia, where teams of artists and craftsmen would transform the vast, empty space into a vision of heaven on earth. The interior was a volume unlike anything ever created, a space so large that clouds were set to form near the ceiling on humid days, so acoustically perfect that a whisper at the altar could be heard clearly at the far end of the nave. Mosaists began their painstaking work, covering the walls and dome with millions of tiny tesserae. Each tessera was carefully angled to catch and reflect light in specific ways, creating surfaces that seemed to glow with inner fire. The gold tesserae were made by sandwiching gold leaf between two layers of clear glass, creating a material that would retain its brilliance for centuries. The most skilled artists worked on the dome itself, creating a massive cross surrounded by flowing geometric patterns. The cross seemed to float in a sea of gold, visible from every corner of the cathedral. The artists worked lying on their backs on scaffolding, like Michelangelo would do centuries later in the Sistine Chapel, their hands guided by faith as much as skill. The walls were covered with geometric patterns and stylized vegetation, vines and leaves that seemed to grow organically across the marble surfaces. These patterns were not merely decorative. They carried deep symbolic meaning, representing the Garden of Eden, the tree of life, and the promise of paradise. The marble workers created opus sectile panels, intricate patterns made from thin sheets of colored marble, cut and fitted together like wooden marquetry. These panels covered the lower walls of the cathedral, creating surfaces that seemed to ripple with color and movement. The patterns were based on mathematical principles, creating harmonious relationships between colors and shapes that pleased the eye and calmed the soul. The great bronze doors were crafted by master metalworkers, their surfaces covered with relief sculptures depicting scenes from the life of Christ. These doors, each weighing several tons, were balanced so perfectly that a child could open them with a gentle push. The bronze had been polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the interior light and creating additional sources of illumination. 40 windows pierced the base of the dome, allowing light to stream down into the interior like a golden rain. These windows were not merely openings in the wall, but carefully designed light sources that would change the character of the interior throughout the day. Morning light would illuminate the eastern sections, while evening light would bathe the western areas in warm golden tones. The consecration, December 27th, 537 AD, a date that would echo through history. After 5 years, 10 months, and 4 days of construction, Hagia Sophia was ready for its consecration. The entire city had been preparing for this moment, which would mark not just the completion of a building, but the fulfillment of an imperial dream. The ceremony began before dawn, with the ringing of church bells throughout Constantinople. The sound cascaded across the city like waves, awakening citizens who had waited years for this moment. Families dressed in their finest clothes and made their way through the streets toward the great cathedral, joining processions that had begun. In every quarter of the city, Emperor Justinian and Empress Theodora led the imperial procession, walking through streets carpeted with flower petals and lined with citizens holding candles. The emperor carried a golden chalice, while the empress bore a jeweled cross. Behind them walked the senators, the palace officials, and representatives of the guilds whose members had built the cathedral. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Minas, met the imperial couple at the great bronze doors. As these doors swung open, for the first time, the assembled crowd caught their first glimpse of the completed interior. The reaction was immediate and emotional. Gasps of wonder, tears of joy, and spontaneous prayers of thanksgiving rose from the crowd as Justinian stepped across the threshold. He is said to have paused, overwhelmed by the magnificence of what had been achieved. Looking up at the great dome floating high above, he reportedly exclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed you," referring to the Temple of Solomon, previously considered the greatest religious structure ever built. The consecration service itself was a mixture of traditional Byzantine liturgy and ceremonial elements created specifically for this unique occasion. Incense filled the vast space, creating clouds that drifted upward toward the dome-like prayers made visible. The choir's voices echoed and re-echoed off the marble walls, creating harmonies that seemed to come from heaven itself. Holy relics were placed in specially prepared niches throughout the cathedral. Fragments of the true cross, bones of martyrs, and other sacred objects that would make Hagia Sophia not just a church, but a shrine of international pilgrimage. Each relic was blessed individually and installed with appropriate ceremony. The lighting of the great chandelier was perhaps the most spectacular moment of the consecration. Suspended from the center of the dome, this massive fixture held hundreds of oil lamps. As each lamp was lit in sequence, the cathedral gradually filled with warm light that was reflected and multiplied by the golden mosaics, transforming the interior into a vision of celestial glory. The Golden Age begins in the months following its consecration. Hagia Sophia became the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire. Daily services drew thousands of worshippers, while pilgrims from across the Christian world journeyed to Constantinople, specifically to experience the cathedral's wonder. The building had achieved something remarkable. It was simultaneously a work of art, an engineering marvel, and a profoundly spiritual space. The emperor and empress attended services regularly, occupying the special imperial gallery that overlooked the main floor of the cathedral. From this elevated position, surrounded by purple silk hangings and golden ornaments, they could observe the services while maintaining the ceremonial distance. appropriate to their divine appointment. The cathedral's acoustics proved to be as remarkable as its visual impact. The dome acted like a great resonating chamber, amplifying and enriching the voices of the choir. Byzantine chant, with its haunting melodies and complex harmonies, seemed to have found its perfect home. The music would rise from the floor of the cathedral, circle the dome, and descend again like audible light. The daily rhythm of services created a pattern that gave structure to life throughout the city. The great bronze doors would open at dawn, for morning prayers remain open throughout the day for private devotion, and close after evening services as lamps were lit throughout Constantinople. The cathedral became a clock of sorts, marking the passage of time not in hours but in prayers. Scholars and theologians from throughout the Christian world came to study and teach in Constantinople, drawn by the intellectual atmosphere surrounding the great cathedral. The cathedral's library grew to house thousands of manuscripts, including works of theology, philosophy, mathematics, and literature. This collection would help preserve classical learning through the coming centuries of upheaval. The cathedral also served important state functions. Imperial coronations took place beneath the Great Dome, with the new emperor receiving his crown from the patriarch, while standing on a disc of colored marble that marked the symbolic center of the empire. Foreign ambassadors were received here, their credentials presented in ceremonies designed to demonstrate the power and glory of Byzantium. The economic impact of the cathedral extended far beyond its construction costs. Pilgrims brought revenue to the city, while the prestige of the building enhanced Constantinople's position as a center of international trade. Merchants from as far away as India and Britain sought to do business in the city that could create such marvels. The philosopher Emperor to understand the true significance of Hagia Sophia, we must delve deeper into the mind of the man who conceived it, Justinian I. Perhaps the most complex and accomplished ruler in Byzantine history. Far from being merely a political leader, Justinian was a scholar, a theologian, and a visionary who saw in the great cathedral not just a monument to his reign, but a physical embodiment of his dream for a renewed Roman Empire. Justinian's education had been comprehensive and deep. He studied law, theology, philosophy, and mathematics, developing a mind that could grasp both practical details and abstract principles. His famous law code, the Corpus Juris Civilis, would influence legal systems for centuries to come. But law was not his only intellectual passion. He was equally fascinated by architecture, engineering, and the arts. The emperor's daily routine reflected his scholarly nature. He would rise before dawn to read and write, often working on legal documents or theological treatises by lamplight. His personal library was one of the finest in the world, containing works in Latin, Greek, and several Oriental languages. He could discuss Aristotelian philosophy with equal facility as military strategy or architectural engineering. Justinian's vision for Hagia Sophia was shaped by his understanding of sacred geometry and Neoplatonic philosophy. He saw the cathedral not as mere building, but as a physical representation of the cosmic order, the dome representing heaven, the square base representing earth, and the entire structure serving as a bridge between the two realms. The emperor personally reviewed every major design decision for the cathedral. He studied the architectural drawings with the same attention he gave to legal codes, understanding that both represented attempts to create perfect order from chaos. His marginalia on the construction documents reveal a mind that grasped both engineering principles and aesthetic theory during the construction years. Justinian would often visit the building site, not as a ceremonial gesture, but as an active participant in the creative process. He could discuss the properties of different marbles with the stonecutters, debate acoustic principles with the architect, and evaluate the artistic merit of mosaic designs with the craftsman. His involvement was hands-on and deeply informed. The emperor's relationship with his architects was one of mutual respect and intellectual collaboration. Anthemes and Isidore were not merely employees carrying out imperial commands, but partners in a creative endeavor that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Their late-night planning sessions were intellectual symposiums where mathematics, theology, and art intersected. The Empress of Wisdom. Beside the philosopher, emperor, stood Theodora, a woman whose intelligence and strength were legendary throughout the Byzantine world. A rise from humble origins to become one of the most powerful empresses in history was itself a remarkable story. But her role in the creation of Hagia Sophia was equally significant. Theodora's background in the theater had given her an acute understanding of space, light, and dramatic effect. She could visualize how the cathedral would impact those who entered it, understanding instinctively that architecture was a form of performance art played out on a grand scale. Her suggestions regarding the interior design often showed an artist's sensitivity to color, proportion, and emotional impact. The Empress was particularly interested in the cathedral's role as a space for women's worship. In the Byzantine tradition, women occupied galleries separated from the main floor. But Theodora insisted that these spaces be designed with the same care and magnificence as the rest of the cathedral. The women's galleries in Hagia Sophia became models of Byzantine interior design, featuring delicate marble work and intimate mosaic decorations. Her theological knowledge was profound, and she engaged in lengthy discussions with the patriarch and other church officials about the symbolic program of the cathedral's decorations. Her influence can be seen in the emphasis on certain saints and biblical themes that had particular significance for women's spiritual lives. Theodora also served as a crucial liaison between the imperial court and the craft guilds working on the cathedral. Her common origins allowed her to communicate with the workers in a way that the aristocratic Justinian sometimes could not. She would visit the construction site regularly, listening to concerns and suggestions from the craftsmen and bringing their insights back to the planning sessions. The Empress understood the international significance of the cathedral project and worked to ensure that foreign visitors would be appropriately impressed. She personally oversaw the design of the ceremonial protocols that would govern important state occasions in the completed building, understanding that Hagia Sophia would serve not just as a place of worship, but as a stage for imperial pageantry. Her personal devotion was genuine and deep. Theodora spent hours in prayer, often in the private chapel of the great palace, contemplating the spiritual significance of the great work being undertaken. She saw the cathedral as more than an imperial monument. It was an offering to God, a physical prayer that would continue for centuries after her own death. The community of builders. The construction of Hagia. Sophia created a unique community. Within Constantinople, thousands of skilled craftsmen and laborers who worked together for more than 5 years, developing bonds of friendship and shared purpose that transcended the usual divisions of social class and ethnic origin. The master craftsmen formed the heart of this community. These were men at the peak of their professions, artists and engineers whose skills had been refined through decades of experience. They came from throughout the Byzantine Empire and beyond. Greek architects from Athens, Roman engineers from Italy, stonecutters from the quarries of Asia Minor, metalworkers from the foundries of Syria. Each craft guild maintained its own traditions and techniques, but the Hagia Sophia project forced unprecedented cooperation between different specialties. The stonecutters had to coordinate their work precisely with the mortar makers. The metalworkers had to time their installation of fixtures with a mosaicist schedule, and the carpenters had to design their scaffolding to accommodate the needs of all other crafts. Living arrangements for the workers created a temporary city within the city. Dormitories were constructed near the building site, organized by craft and ethnicity, but encouraging interaction between different groups. Common dining halls served meals that reflected the diverse origins of the workforce. Greek olive oil, Italian wine, Syrian spices, and Egyptian bread created a cuisine as international as the workers themselves. The workers developed their own informal social hierarchy based on skill and experience rather than birth or wealth. Master craftsmen commanded respect regardless of their origins, while younger workers learned not just technical skills, but also the values of patience, precision, and dedication to quality that characterized the project. Religious observance was an important part of daily life for the construction community. Each morning began with prayers for safety and divine guidance, while evening services offered thanksgiving for the day's progress. The partially completed cathedral itself served as the primary place of worship, with services held in completed sections while work continued in others. The physical demands of the work created strong bonds between the workers, men who labored together to lift massive stones or install intricate mosaics, developed trust and friendship that extended beyond the construction site. Many workers would maintain these relationships for the rest of their lives, creating a network of craftsmen throughout the empire who had shared in the creation of the great cathedral, the science of sacred space, the creation of Hagia, Sophia, represented the culmination of centuries of architectural and engineering knowledge, combined with innovations that would influence building design for generations to come. The scientific principles underlying the cathedral's construction were as sophisticated as those used in any modern structure. The mathematical basis of the design drew on both classical Greek geometry and newer developments in mathematical analysis. The architects used advanced calculations to determine the precise curves needed for the dome and supporting arches, ensuring that structural forces would be distributed efficiently throughout the building. These calculations were performed without modern computational tools, requiring extraordinary skill and intuition. The acoustical design of the cathedral was based on empirical observation and practical experience rather than formal scientific theory, but the results were remarkably sophisticated. The dome acted as a resonating chamber that amplified sound while maintaining clarity, allowing a speaker at the altar to be heard throughout the vast interior without shouting. Lighting design was another area where scientific principles merged with artistic vision. The 40 windows at the base of the dome were positioned to create even illumination throughout the day, while their size and shape were calculated to prevent glare while maximizing the amount of light entering the space. The interaction between natural and artificial lighting created an ever-changing interplay of light and shadow. The selection and preparation of building materials involved chemistry as well as engineering. The mortar formula included additives that increased both strength and workability, while the choice of different stones and metals took into account their thermal expansion properties. resistance to weathering, and compatibility with other materials. Structural engineering innovations included the use of buttressing systems that were centuries ahead of their time. The weight of the Great Dome was transferred through a complex system of arches and half-domes to massive piers, allowing the interior to remain unobstructed by supporting columns. This structural system would later influence the development of Gothic architecture in Western Europe. The construction process itself incorporated quality control methods that ensured consistency and reliability. Each batch of mortar was tested. Before use, stones were inspected for flaws before installation, and critical structural elements were double-checked by multiple craftsmen. These procedures helped create a building that would survive earthquakes, wars, and centuries of use. The artisan's vision within the community of builders. The artists who created Hagia, Sophia's decorative elements, held a special place. These were men who combined technical skill with spiritual devotion, understanding that their work would serve not just aesthetic purposes, but would help create an environment conducive to prayer and contemplation. The master mosaicist who oversaw the decoration of the Great Dome was a Greek artist named Georgios, whose family had worked in colored glass and stone for 4 generations. His grandfather had learned the ancient techniques from craftsmen who had worked on the last great mosaics of the Roman Empire, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Georgios approached his work with the reverence of a priest. Preparing for Mass, each morning he would pray before beginning work, asking for divine guidance in creating images worthy of the sacred space they would inhabit. His hands stained permanently with the colors of his craft. Glassmakers would heat sand and minerals to precise temperatures, adding gold leaf and silver at exactly the right moment to create tesserae that would capture and reflect light for centuries. Each batch of tesserae was slightly different, requiring the artist to adjust his techniques and color choices accordingly. The process of setting the mosaics was painstakingly slow. A skilled mosaicist might complete only a few square feet of work in a day, each tessera placed individually and angled to catch light in precisely the desired way. The artists worked with tiny hammers and chisels, shaping each piece of glass to fit perfectly with its neighbors. The iconographic program of the cathedral's decorations was developed through collaboration between the artists, theologians, and imperial officials. Each image carried multiple layers of meaning, accessible to both learned scholars and simple believers. The Great Cross in the dome was visible from every corner of the cathedral, serving as a constant reminder of Christian faith. Color theory played an important role in a decorative scheme. Different areas of the cathedral were assigned different color palettes based on their liturgical function and symbolic significance. The altar area featured warm golds and reds, while the nave incorporated cooler blues and greens, creating a subtle progression that guided the eye and the spirit toward the sacred center of the space. The imperial workshop, the great palace of Constantinople, included workshops where the most precious and delicate elements of Hagia Sophia's furnishings were created under direct imperial supervision. These workshops employed the finest craftsmen in the empire, men whose skills were considered state secrets and whose products were reserved for the most important religious and ceremonial purposes. The imperial goldsmith's workshop produced the altar vessels, candlesticks, and other liturgical objects that would be used in the cathedral's services. These craftsmen worked with gold that had been refined to absolute purity, creating objects that seemed to capture and hold light within their polished surfaces. Each piece was not merely functional, but was itself a work of art worthy of the magnificent building it would serve. Silk weavers in the palace workshops created the altar cloths, vestments, and hangings that would adorn the cathedral during important ceremonies. Byzantine silk was renowned throughout the medieval world for its quality and beauty, and the pieces created for Hagia Sophia represented the pinnacle of the weaver's art. The imperial purple, reserved exclusively for the emperor and the highest church officials, was woven with gold thread that caught the light like captured sunlight. The imperial scriptorium was responsible for creating the magnificent liturgical books that would be used in cathedral services. Master calligraphers worked with specially prepared parchment using inks made from precious minerals and organic dyes. Each page was a work of art, with text written in perfect uncial script, surrounded by illuminated borders, featuring geometric patterns and stylized vegetation. The binding of these books required the skills of master leather workers who created covers from the finest Byzantine leather, often dyed imperial purple and decorated with gold leaf and precious stones. These books would be displayed on special lecterns made from ivory and precious metals. Their pages turned with reverent care during the cathedral services. Ivory carvers in the palace workshops created the cathedral's episcopal throne, masterpiece of Byzantine decorative art. The ivory came from elephants in distant Africa, transported along ancient trade routes to Constantinople, where master craftsmen would transform it into intricate reliefs depicting scenes from the life of Christ and the history of the Christian Church. The carving of ivory required infinite patience, as a single slip of the knife could destroy months of work. The workshop of the imperial seal maker produced the official seals and ceremonial objects that would be used to authenticate documents. related to the cathedral's administration. These seals were carved from precious stones and metals, each one a tiny sculpture that combined artistic beauty with legal authority. The imperial seal maker worked in complete secrecy, as the unauthorized reproduction of these seals was considered an act of treason. The merchants of wonder. The construction of Hagia Sophia created opportunities for merchants throughout the Byzantine Empire and beyond. The project required materials and craftsmen from every corner of the known world, creating trade networks that would outlast the construction itself and contribute to Constantinople's prosperity for centuries to come. The marble merchants formed one of the most important groups. These men maintained relationships with quarries throughout the Mediterranean world, understanding not only the commercial aspects of the stone trade, but also the geological properties that made different marbles suitable for specific architectural purposes. They could identify the best Pentelic marble for structural work, the most beautiful Proconesian marble for decorative elements, and the rarest colored stones for special features. Each shipment of marble was a major undertaking. The stones had to be carefully quarried, shaped to rough dimensions, and transported by ox cart to the nearest port. Loading marble onto ships required special techniques to prevent damage during transport, while unloading at Constantinople's harbor involved complex systems of pulleys and ramps. The marble merchants maintained their own fleets of specialized vessels, designed specifically for carrying heavy stone cargoes. The spice merchants played an unexpected role in the cathedral's construction. Certain spices were ground into powder and mixed with mortar to create materials with specific properties. Cinnamon was added to mortar, used in areas where its natural preservative qualities would help prevent decay, while other spices were incorporated into compounds used to protect metals from corrosion. Silk merchants provided not only the precious fabrics used in the cathedral's decoration, but also the raw materials for other important elements. Silk cocoons were boiled down to create a protein-based adhesive used in mosaic work, while silk fibers were incorporated into certain types of mortar to increase their flexibility and strength. The incense trade received a tremendous boost from the cathedral project. Hagia Sophia would consume enormous quantities of frankincense, myrrh, and other aromatic substances, creating demand that encouraged merchants to establish new trade routes to the sources of these precious materials in Arabia and India. The quality of incense used in the cathedral had to meet the highest standards, as inferior product would produce smoke that could damage the delicate mosaic work. Book merchants and manuscript dealers found their services in great demand as the cathedral's library was assembled. They scoured monasteries and private collections throughout the empire, seeking copies of theological works. mathematical treatises, and historical chronicles that would support the scholarly activities associated with a great church. Many ancient works survived the fall of Rome only because Byzantine merchants preserved them in the libraries of Constantinople. The Pilgrim's Journey, even before its completion. Word of Hagia, Sophia's magnificence, had spread throughout the Christian world, and pilgrims began planning journeys to witness what was already being called the greatest church in Christendom. These early pilgrims played an important role in the cathedral's history, as their reactions and descriptions helped establish its reputation and influence. Brother Marcus, a monk from a monastery in southern Italy, was among the first foreign visitors to see the completed cathedral. His journey to Constantinople had taken 3 months, traveling by ship across the Mediterranean and then overland through the mountainous regions of Anatolia. His diary, preserved in the monastery archives, provides a contemporary account of the cathedral's impact on visitors. As I approached the great city, Brother Marcus wrote, I could see the golden dome rising above all other buildings, catching the morning light and reflecting it back to heaven. But no description could have prepared me for the moment when I first stepped through the bronze doors and gazed upward into that vast space. I felt as though I had been transported directly into the presence of the Almighty. The pilgrim routes to Constantinople became well-established pathways that connected Christian communities throughout Europe and the Middle East. Monasteries along these routes provided hospitality to travelers, while local guides offered their services to help pilgrims navigate the sometimes dangerous passages through mountains and forests. Many pilgrims brought offerings for the cathedral, precious relics from their home churches, beautifully illuminated manuscripts, or simply monetary donations to support the ongoing maintenance of the great building. These offerings were received with appropriate ceremony and incorporated into the cathedral's growing collection of sacred objects. The economic impact of pilgrimage on Constantinople was substantial. Pilgrims needed food, lodging, and local guides, creating opportunities for local merchants and service providers. Special markets developed near the cathedral where pilgrims could purchase souvenirs, religious objects, and supplies for their return journeys. The cultural exchange facilitated by pilgrimage was equally important between distant communities, helping to spread architectural and artistic innovations inspired by Hagia Sophia throughout the Christian world. Many pilgrims were themselves craftsmen who studied the cathedral's construction techniques and brought this knowledge back to their home regions. The spiritual impact of pilgrimage to Hagia Sophia was profound and lasting. Many pilgrims reported experiencing visions or spiritual revelations within the cathedral, while others described a sense of peace and spiritual renewal that lasted for years after their return home. These accounts helped establish the cathedral's reputation as a place of particular spiritual power, the sounds of sacred space. The acoustic properties of Hagia Sophia were as carefully planned as its visual elements, creating an environment where music became an integral part of the spiritual experience. The cathedral's unique acoustic signature influenced the development of Byzantine chant and established Constantinople as one of the most important centers of religious music in the medieval world. The cathedral's choirmaster, Johannes Chrysostomos, was himself a composer of great skill who understood how to use the building's acoustic properties to maximum effect. He had studied music theory as well as theology, understanding that in the Byzantine tradition, music was not merely decoration for worship, but was itself a form of prayer, a way of reaching toward the divine through organized sound. The positioning of the choir within the cathedral was carefully considered. The singers stood in the galleries above the main floor, their voices projecting downward and outward in patterns that took advantage of the dome's natural amplification. The marble surfaces of the interior acted as reflectors, bouncing sound around the space and creating rich harmonic overtones that enhanced the basic melodies. Byzantine chant, with its modal scales and complex melodic patterns, seemed perfectly suited to the cathedral's acoustics. The long, sustained notes that characterized this musical tradition allowed the singers to take advantage of the building's natural reverberation, creating sounds that seemed to hang in the air long after the voices had stopped singing. The cathedral housed several different choirs, each with its own repertoire and function. The primary choir consisted of professional singers who performed during the major liturgical celebrations, while smaller groups provided music for daily services. A children's choir added their clear, sweet voices to special occasions, while the imperial choir performed only when the emperor and empress were present. Musical manuscripts were specially created for use in Hagia Sophia, with notation systems that indicated not only the melodies, but also how they should be adapted to the cathedral's unique acoustic environment. These manuscripts were works of art in themselves, with musical notations surrounded by illuminated borders that reflected the visual splendor of the building. Where they would be used, the training of singers for the cathedral was rigorous and comprehensive. Young men were selected not only for their vocal abilities, but also for their intelligence and spiritual devotion. Their education included not only music, but also theology, rhetoric, and classical literature, creating scholar musicians who understood the deeper meanings of the texts they sang. The influence of Hagia Sophia's music extended far beyond Constantinople. Visitors carried melodies and compositional techniques back to their home regions, spreading Byzantine musical practices throughout the Christian world. Many of the chants, composed specifically for the cathedral, became standard parts of the Orthodox liturgy, sung in churches from Russia to Ethiopia, the keepers of knowledge, adjacent to Hagia, Sophia. A great library was established that would become one of the most important centers of learning in the medieval world. This library was not merely a repository of books, but was conceived as a living institution where scholars could study, debate, and preserve the accumulated knowledge of classical antiquity and Christian tradition. The library's first director was Cassiodorus Magnus, a scholar who had previously served as secretary to Theodoric the Great in Italy before coming to Constantinople. Cassiodorus brought with him not only his personal collection of manuscripts, but also his vision of how a great library should function as a center of intellectual life. The collection policy of the library was both comprehensive and selective. Scribes were employed to copy important works that existed only in single manuscripts, ensuring their preservation for future generations. Agents were sent throughout the empire and beyond to locate and acquire significant texts, while scholars were encouraged to donate their personal libraries to the cathedral's collection. The library's copying workshops employed dozens of scribes who worked with the patience and precision of monks, understanding that they were preserving civilization itself through their careful work. Each manuscript was proofread multiple times to ensure accuracy, while the most important texts were copied onto the finest parchment with inks that would resist fading for centuries. The subjects covered by the library's collection were remarkably broad. Theological works formed the core, but the collection also included classical philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, and literature. This comprehensiveness reflected the Byzantine understanding that all knowledge was ultimately unified, that secular learning supported and enriched religious understanding. Scholars came from throughout the known world to study in Constantinople's libraries. The city became a magnet for intellectuals who understood that here they could find resources unavailable anywhere else. These visiting scholars often remained for years, contributing to the intellectual life of the city while pursuing their own research. The library also served as a scriptorium where new works were composed. Historians chronicled the events of their time. Theologians developed new interpretations of Christian doctrine, and poets created works that would influence literature for centuries to come. The intellectual atmosphere surrounding Hagia Sophia encouraged creativity as well as preservation. The relationship between the library and the cathedral was intimate and mutually reinforcing. Sermons delivered in the cathedral drew on the scholarly resources of the library, while the library's acquisitions were often influenced by the liturgical needs of the church. This integration of worship and learning created an environment where intellectual and spiritual development supported each other. The emperors. Twilight, as Emperor Justinian entered the final years of his life. Hagia Sophia stood as the crowning achievement of his remarkable reign. The cathedral had become more than a building. It was a symbol of imperial power, Christian faith, and human achievement that would inspire awe for centuries to come. The aging emperor would often spend quiet hours in the cathedral, particularly in the early morning when the building was empty except for a few priests preparing for the day's first service. In these moments of solitude, surrounded by the magnificence he had helped create, Justinian would reflect on the meaning of his life's work and his legacy for future generations. The construction of Hagia Sophia had cost enormous sums. Some historians estimate that it consumed the equivalent of several years' total imperial revenue. Critics had argued that such expenditure was excessive, that the money could have been better spent on military campaigns or infrastructure projects. But Justinian understood that some achievements transcend immediate practical considerations. The emperor's health was declining, and he knew that his time was limited. He had already begun making provisions for the cathedral's maintenance and continued operation, establishing endowments that would ensure adequate funding for centuries to come. He wanted to guarantee that future generations would be able to experience the wonder he had created. Theodora had died several years earlier, and her absence left a profound void in Justinian's life. He would sometimes sit in the imperial gallery where they had worshipped together, remembering their conversations about the cathedral's design and her insights into its spiritual significance. Her influence on the building was evident in countless details that reflected her understanding of beauty and devotion. The emperor's relationship with his architects had evolved from that of patron and employees to something approaching friendship. Anthemius and Isidore were now elderly men themselves, honored throughout the empire for their achievement, but still actively involved in maintaining and refining their masterpiece. They would meet regularly with Justinian to discuss minor improvements and adjustments that would enhance the cathedral's functionality. The international reputation of Hagia Sophia had exceeded even Justinian's ambitious expectations. Ambassadors from distant kingdoms would specifically request tours of the cathedral, understanding that seeing it was essential to understanding the power and sophistication of the Byzantine Empire. The building had become a form of diplomacy, in stone, impressing foreign visitors more effectively than any military display. As he contemplated his legacy, Justinian understood that Hagia Sophia would outlast not only his own life, but probably the empire itself. Buildings could survive the fall of governments, and the cathedral would continue to inspire and elevate human spirits. Long after the political circumstances of its creation had been forgotten, the living monument in the years following Justinian's death in 565 AD, Hagia Sophia continued to evolve and adapt, while maintaining its essential character as one of the world's great architectural achievements. The cathedral became a living monument that reflected the changing fortunes of the Byzantine Empire while remaining a constant source of spiritual inspiration. Successive emperors made their own contributions to the cathedral, adding mosaics, improving the liturgical furnishings, and occasionally making structural repairs necessitated by earthquakes or the simple passage of time. Each addition was made with careful attention to the original architectural vision, ensuring that new elements harmonized with Anthemius and Isidore's design. The cathedral's role in imperial ceremonies became increasingly elaborate over time. Coronations, royal weddings, and important state occasions were all celebrated within its walls, with ceremonies that took advantage of the building's dramatic spaces and acoustic properties. These events reinforced the connection between religious and political authority that was central to Byzantine political theory. The scholarly traditions associated with the cathedral continued to flourish. The library grew steadily, acquiring new works and commissioning copies of important texts. Schools were established in connection with the cathedral, where young men could study theology, philosophy, and the classical texts that formed the foundation of Byzantine education. The cathedral's influence on architectural development extended far beyond Constantinople. Builders throughout the Byzantine Empire and beyond studied its design principles and attempted to recreate its effects in their own projects. While none achieved the scale or perfection of the original, these derivative buildings helped spread Byzantine architectural ideas throughout Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Pilgrimage to Hagia Sophia remained an important aspect of medieval religious life. The cathedral's reputation for spiritual power grew over the centuries, with countless stories of miracles and divine interventions associated with prayer and worship within its walls. These accounts, whether factual or legendary, contributed to the building's significance as a place of special holiness. The maintenance of such a vast structure required constant attention and considerable resources. Specialist craftsmen were permanently employed to care for the mosaics, repair stonework, and maintain the complex systems that kept the building functional. This ongoing care ensured that the cathedral retained its magnificence through centuries of use. The cathedral also served as a repository for precious objects and relics collected from throughout the Christian world. These treasures not only enhanced the building's spiritual significance, but also made it a target for conquerors and looters during periods of political instability. The protection of these objects became an important responsibility for the cathedral's guardians. The eternal light, as centuries passed and empires rose and fell, Hagia Sophia endured as a testament to human achievement and divine inspiration. The golden light that streamed through its windows seemed eternal, unchanged despite the political and social transformations that swept across the Byzantine world. The cathedral witnessed the glory days of the Middle Byzantine period, when Constantinople was the largest and most prosperous city in Europe. During these years, the building reached its full potential as a center of worship, learning, and artistic achievement. The mosaics were expanded and refined. The liturgical music evolved to new heights of complexity and beauty, and the library became one of the most comprehensive collections of knowledge in the world. The building also endured periods of crisis and decline. Iconoclastic controversies led to the temporary destruction of many figural mosaics, though these were later restored with even greater magnificence. Economic difficulties sometimes made it challenging to maintain the structure properly, but the commitment of successive generations of believers ensured that essential repairs were always made. The Fourth Crusade of 1204 brought Western Crusaders to Constantinople, and they were as amazed by Hagia Sophia as any previous visitors had been. Their chronicles describe a building that still possessed all its original grandeur, despite being nearly 7 centuries old. However, the political disruption of this period, it results in the loss of some precious objects. The restored Byzantine Empire of the later medieval period saw Hagia Sophia continue its role as the symbolic heart of Eastern Orthodoxy. New mosaics were added that reflected the artistic styles of their time while respecting the classical traditions established by the original builders. The cathedral remained a place where the past and present met in harmonious unity. The scholarly traditions associated with the cathedral played a crucial role in preserving classical learning during periods when such knowledge was threatened elsewhere. Manuscripts copied in Constantinople's scriptoriums help ensure that works of ancient philosophy, science, and literature survived the various political and cultural upheavals of the medieval period. The architectural influence of Hagia Sophia continued to spread, inspiring builders in Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, and other Orthodox countries. Each interpretation reflected local materials and traditions, while maintaining the essential spiritual and aesthetic principles embodied in the original design. Throughout all these centuries, the cathedral remained, above all, a place of worship, where ordinary believers could experience the divine presence in an environment of unparalleled beauty and majesty. The prayers offered within its walls created an unbroken chain of devotion that connected the present with the age of castle. Justinian and looked forward to future generation in its sacred spaces. The wisdom of stone dot in the gentle twilight of a spring evening in the year 1453. As the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, knelt in prayer before the altar of Hagia, Sophia, the great cathedral held within its walls the accumulated wisdom of nearly 1,000 years. The building had become more than its creators ever imagined. It was a repository of human experience, a teacher whose lessons were written in stone and gold. The emperor's prayer was for his city and his people, who faced an uncertain future. As Ottoman armies approached the walls of Constantinople, yet even in this moment of crisis, the cathedral provided solace and strength. Its eternal spaces reminded those who worshipped there that some achievements transcend the rise and fall of individual kingdoms. The mosaics that covered the walls and dome had acquired a patina of age that enhanced rather than diminished their beauty. Centuries of lamplight and incense had given the gold backgrounds a warm, honey-colored glow that seemed to emanate from within the tesserae themselves. Each mosaic told its story not only through its imagery, but through the subtle changes that time had wrought in its appearance. The marble floors, polished by millions of footsteps, had developed patterns of wear that reflected the cathedral's hues over the centuries. The paths worn by processional routes, the smooth depressions where pilgrims had knelt in prayer, and the gentle undulations created by the settling of foundations, all contributed to the building's character and charm. The acoustic properties of the space had evolved subtly over time as the building settled and aged. Musicians and clergy who knew the cathedral intimately could detect these changes and adjust their performances accordingly. The building itself had become a musical instrument, shaped by centuries of song and prayer into an instrument of perfect spiritual resonance. The library associated with the cathedral had grown to encompass one of the world's great collections of knowledge. Scholars from throughout Europe and the Middle East continue to come to Constantinople to study manuscripts that existed nowhere else. The intellectual tradition established by Justinian and his successors had created a legacy of learning that would outlast the political institutions that supported it. The techniques developed during the cathedral's construction had influenced building practices throughout the medieval world. Master craftsmen trained in Constantinople carried their knowledge to distant lands, where they adapted Byzantine methods to local materials and conditions. The cathedral's architectural DNA could be found in churches from Russia to Ethiopia, the Spiritual influence of Hagia Sophia extended far beyond its physical boundaries. Pilgrims who had worshipped within its walls carried memories of its beauty and majesty back to their home communities, where they inspired local builders and artists to create their own expressions of divine glory. The cathedral had become a spiritual center whose influence radiated throughout the Orthodox world, the eternal present, as we draw near the end of our journey through the history of Hagia Sophia. Let us pause in that eternal present where all great achievements exist simultaneously. In the golden light that streams through the cathedral's windows, past and future merge into a single moment of transcendent beauty. Here, in this sacred space, Justinian and Theodora still walk in imperial procession, their purple robes trailing across marble floors that reflect the light of 1,000 lamps. Anthemes and Isidore still climb their scaffolding, their minds focused on calculations that will ensure their dome floats weightlessly between earth and heaven. The craftsmen are still at their work, the mosaists placing each tessera with infinite care, the marble workers polishing surfaces until they gleam like mirrors, the metal workers shaping bronze doors that will open onto wonder for countless generations. Their hands move with the patience of those who know they are creating something that will outlast their own brief lives. The choir still sings in the shadowy galleries, their voices rising and falling with the ancient melodies that seem to emerge from the building itself. The music echoes off the marble walls and swirls around the golden dome, creating harmonies that speak directly to the human soul without need for translation or interpretation. Pilgrims from every century still approach the great bronze doors with wonder and anticipation, their hearts prepared for an encounter with the divine. As those doors swing open and reveal the vast interior space, their gasps of amazement join the eternal chorus of human response to transcendent beauty. The scholars still work in the adjacent library, their quill pens scratching across parchment as they copy and comment on the texts that preserve human wisdom. Their dedication to knowledge and truth creates an unbroken chain of learning that connects the ancient world with the future yet to come. The light itself seems eternal in this place, not merely the physical light that enters through the windows, but the spiritual illumination that the building provides to all who enter with open hearts. This light transcends the boundaries of time and space, connecting each visitor with the universal human aspiration toward the divine dot in this eternal present. The cathedral stands as proof that human beings are capable of creating beauty that serves purposes greater than mere survival or comfort. Hagia Sophia demonstrates that when skill, vision, and devotion combine in service of a transcendent goal. The results can touch the infinite. The building speaks across the centuries in a language that requires no translation, the language of proportion and harmony, of light and space, of materials transformed by human hands into something greater than the sum of their parts. It reminds us that we are capable of achievements that will inspire wonder long after we ourselves have passed into history. The dream continues. And so our journey through the golden light of Constantinople draws to its close. But the story of Hagia Sophia continues beyond the boundaries of any single telling. The great cathedral exists now, not only as a physical structure, but as an idea, a dream made manifest in stone and gold that continues to inspire new generations of dreamers and builders. In the gentle darkness of your bedroom, sleep gradually claims your consciousness. Let the images we have shared settle softly into your mind. Picture the great dome floating serenely against the evening sky, its golden surface reflecting the last light of day. Imagine the marble floors, smooth and cool beneath bare feet, leading toward altars where candles flicker in the sacred darkness. Feel the presence of all those who contributed to this magnificent achievement: emperors and empresses, architects and artists, craftsmen and laborers whose combined efforts created something greater than any individual could have accomplished alone. Their spirits seem to inhabit the building still, guardians of beauty and witnesses to the human capacity for transcendence. The mosaics gleam softly in the darkness, their gold backgrounds catching and reflecting the light of eternal flames. The great cross in the dome watches over the sleeping city, a symbol of hope and redemption that has offered comfort to countless generations of believers. The very stones seem to breathe with the rhythm of centuries, inhaling the prayers of the faithful and exhaling peace. Listen to the whisper of ancient voices, not the voices of the dead, but the eternal voices of human aspiration and achievement. They speak of dreams pursued despite seemingly impossible obstacles, of visions transformed into reality through patience and dedication, of beauty created not for personal glory, but as an offering to the divine. As sleep deepens and the boundary between dream and reality becomes fluid, you may find yourself walking through those sacred spaces, your footsteps joining the millions who have made this pilgrimage across the centuries. The great cathedral welcomes all who approach with reverence and wonder, offering its gifts of beauty and peace to any who are prepared to receive them. The golden light of Constantinople fades gently into the silver light of dreams, where time has no meaning and all beautiful things exist simultaneously in an eternal moment of perfect peace. Rest now in that light, and let the wisdom of stone and the beauty of human achievement carry you gently into the realm of peaceful sleep in the morning. When you wake, refreshed and renewed, something of that golden light will remain with you. A reminder that human beings are capable of creating miracles when they combine skill with vision, dedication with faith, and individual effort with collective purpose. The dream of Hagia Sophia continues in every act of creation, every moment of beauty, every gesture of love that reaches toward the infinite. Sleep well, dear traveler, and dream of golden light.